This game is a classic.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish.
It was a technical achievement with amazing graphics and physics for the time, and it was developed with an engine that set a new standard in gaming, along with a captivating continuation of the first game's plot. Its legacy and influence is still very much apparent, and most who are interested in games know of Half-Life 2. However, I had never played the game before, and in this video I will be sharing my experience as a newcomer to the title, reviewing the vanilla game from a 2021 perspective. Also, there will be no spoilers towards the plotline, as I want to encourage any who hasn't played it yet to experience the story for themselves like I did. So, without any more delay, let's get started. The graphics have not aged well, is what I would usually say about 3D games from the early 2000s. Most of them I struggle to immerse myself in just because the graphics feel so primitive, but I got none of that from Half-Life 2. Despite being dated, it succeeds in making the game look realistic. I was especially impressed with the character models, which are incredibly detailed and complements the characters very well. It even beat most games the next years after it. It certainly still holds up today. Now, going over to the gameplay, there is a lot to say. This is indeed a first-person shooter game, but a lot of the focus is centered around the various puzzles and different areas where you really have to use your brain. And sometimes it is smarter to run past enemies than trying to take down all of them. I found that looking for where you need to go and then finding the most effective way of getting there was a better approach than trying to kill everything on sight. A key element to Half-Life 2 is that most things in the environment are interactable. This allows for greater creativity regarding puzzles where you can mess around with the in-game physics in order to proceed. There are a lot of rooms and areas which require creative thinking and knowledge about what you can do in the game world. I'm actually never going to complete this. Like, what am I actually supposed to do here? Like, what? God damn it. Another thing I think is interesting is that the game has no cutscenes or real load screens. It just pauses the game for a short time before continuing. And I really like this, because it meant that you never lost any control over your character. There was no big fight or needless exposition scene that I did not control. The fact that I was never pulled out of the action amplified the immersion. There is nothing more annoying than your character doing something stupid in a cutscene that you would never do yourself.
This is
Oh no!
Sparta!
Furthermore, I also want to say that the level design is incredible. To avoid the short load in between areas all the time, they were forced to make the stages with a smaller surface area, which made them make a lot of the levels loop back on itself. This meant that they had to be more clever about how the puzzles worked and in which direction everything went in order to utilize each area to its maximum extent. The limitations within the game forces more thought into the level design and placement of enemies. Now, even though the general gameplay encapsulates several things and is full of different elements and unique ways to play the game, it still has a consistent first-person shooter core. Throughout the entire game, you will discover new weapons, and these weapons are introduced in sections where you get a good grasp on in which situations they would be useful. I love the pacing in this aspect of the game because it introduces new weapons in such a way that you understand how it works, and then still gives ammo consistently to the others. This allows you to decide and experiment with different weapons throughout the whole game, giving you a wide spectre of playstyles. Something that also balances this is the relative shortage of ammo in each weapon, forcing you to not just stick to the same gun. All in all, the gameplay rarely slows down and introduces new options to keep the game from becoming boring, despite its relatively basic controls and abilities. On the other side of the game, we have the narrative. A very important piece of what makes Half-Life is the story. When I started the game, I had already done some digging to understand the events of the first Half-Life, as I wanted to have the foundations so the plot would make more sense to me. So I already had an idea of where it was going. After playing the game, I realized you did not really need to know much about the story at all before jumping in. You get a fairly detailed description of what is going on if you pay attention to the dialogue and the environments around you. Nevertheless, I do recommend that you perhaps watch some videos on the subject or read about the main events in the first game if you want to get really invested in the story and the characters. The pure concept of beings of another universe invading and controlling the Earth, forcing humans to submit to their oppressive rule, is nothing new. What makes Half-Life stand out is that it executes the concept almost flawlessly, with unique and cool creatures which can only be found in the series. Something that is very important in regards to immersion and making the plotline believable is good world building, and Half-Life 2 understands this. I love the moments where you can see the atrocities being committed by the combined police force in closed-off parts of the game. It shows how life under this occupation truly is, through subtle episodes and events like these. The world feels convincing because the characters in the game, through their realistic facial animations and dialogue, behave accordingly to what is happening. Another important thing is that the game makes rules and then consistently follows them. Nothing feels unrealistic in context of the world you find yourself in. It does not fall into the common trap of many sci-fi and fantasy stories where something happens just because magic or because a very convenient technological and advanced invention just suddenly works in your favor. Almost everything is introduced early on, and your knowledge is enhanced throughout without anything happening without good reason. And all of this is key in creating an interesting and believable story. The only real exception to this rule is the G-Man, who does not seem to follow any rules and transcends concepts such as time and space. Contrary to everything else, his actions and motives are impossible to get a hold of. However, in this instance, I think it's excusable because he is established as a character that goes beyond this world, and he is portrayed as mystic and unexplainable. It lies in his character not to follow logic and rules. Talking about G-Man, the last element that is essential to a good plotline are the characters in the game. Their personalities, actions, and reactions often make or break a believable story. Most of the main characters are borrowed from the first game, so they are based on already well-written personalities. Barney, Dr. Kleiner, Eli, and Dr. Breen are all introduced within the first hour, allowing both new and old players to be introduced to them for the first time or get caught up with events in between the games. The two new main characters, Alex and Dr. Mossman, are essential to the plot and are both good characters. However, I would argue that they are the weaker characters compared to the others. What I mean by this is that they feel a little bit two-dimensional. You don't really get to know them all that much beyond their general motivations. These are smaller nitpicks though, and they work well with the story nonetheless. The general dialogue between characters feel very realistic and natural as well. I have to compliment the dynamic between new and old NPCs. The voice acting is great, and the facial animations actually match what the character seems to be thinking and saying. Their relationships are very convincing, and even small talk between them are entertaining and interesting. After going through this game and thinking about every element I could, I have very little criticism. There are a few nitpicks where certain chapters drag on a bit too long, and there are a few small plot holes here and there, and I think the parts where you had to survive multiple waves of enemies were straight up boring, and it just felt like they were there just to pad out the game. I also wish certain characters were given more screen time to develop a better understanding of their actions and motivations. Also, there was a single time throughout where I discovered a technical issue, and that was just a small error that had a visual glitch. Otherwise, I experienced no technical problems, and I cannot really find any other criticisms because it is such a solid game. Lastly, I want to say that the game is not scary. I knew that Half-Life Alyx is in many ways a horror game, but in Half-Life 2 I did not get scared a single time. Ah! Jeez! Ah! Jesus Christ! Ah. How's your day going? Ah! I get jump scared every time. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and give this game an official Storm of Magic rating. Now, maybe you are asking, why is it not 100%? And my reasoning is that it is not flawless. A 10 out of 10 rating to me is a perfect score, and Half-Life 2 is not a perfect game. As said earlier, I have a few nitpicks, and especially the certain chapters that feel a bit lazy and dragged on too long is enough to give it an 85%. Now, it is important to remember that that is an absolutely incredible score. The game gives the first-person shooter genre a fresh take and explores beautifully executed concepts brilliantly. It is heavily recommended to people who likes creative puzzle solving, science fiction, first-person shooters, and good storytelling in general. It was a pleasure to experience this classic 2004 title, and I'm going to thank everyone who made it to this part of the video for sticking through with me, be it out of a nostalgic desire to see a newcomer's take on the game, or as a source to help you to decide if you want to play it or not. Nevertheless, on a last note, I again want to inform you that all of my points, criticisms, praises, and general opinions are objectively right, and everyone else is wrong.